and Tim from.
Oscar, Boris. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate you all coming on time, and welcome to take your seats, please. We have a power-packed program for 1 hour, so we're going to start on time and hopefully end on time. And for our African delegates, like myself, Karibuni, Habari Asubuhi, Asante Sana. Nice to have you all here. So my name is Arif Neki. I'm the Senior Advisor for Strategic Partnerships at the UN Resident Coordinator's Office in Kenya. And within that, I have embedded what's called the SDG Partnership Platform, which just celebrated its 10th anniversary last month, and has a new strategy going forward supported by the Boston Consulting Group. So we're very excited to be part of this event. Thank you to Building Bridges and to Chairman Patrick Odier and team for inviting us. We'd like to really focus on the opportunities in Africa and really have a insightful conversation with all the experts in the room to understand how one can drive greater deal flow, greater appreciation of risk returns in Africa, why Africa is a recipient of minuscule investments compared to other continents, and Africa being one of the lungs of the world, as I said yesterday, being the custodian of 60% of the green minerals for the green transition. There are tremendous opportunities, but one needs to shift the narrative and understand that better, and who better than the panel that we have to speak to you about this. So without further ado, we're going to get going with the program. Thank you all again, once again, for joining us. And I was told that a great session is when you have standing room only, so thank you all for standing as well. I'd like to invite our first speaker for opening remarks, who is none other than Patrick Odier, our host, the chairman of Building Bridges. Please put your hands together for him.
Good morning, dear Building Bridges friends. It's a privilege to say a few words just before the session starts here, just to tell you how happy we are at Building Bridges that Africa is taking such a place in our program. I think we ourselves were absolutely convinced quite early in the development of our Building Bridges activities that we should emphasize the frontier countries and the frontier regions of these worlds that do not represent anything else but huge opportunities for us all. That's why we went already twice as a delegation to Kenya to sort of better understand what were those opportunities and where we could be useful for our community. As you know, building bridges is about creating a space where capital drives real sustainable impact, and in particular Kenya is a gateway to addressing Africa's vast potential and challenges. Africa is home to, and you all know that, 18% of the world population, but attract, unfortunately, less than 5% of global foreign direct investment. So there's an imbalance here that is probably coming from a lack of awareness of what are those opportunities and potentials. And I think one of the idea of going to Africa and going to Kenya in particular is to ask Kenya to come back to us here and to show good examples of what could be realized with the right sets of conditions locally, both from a public point of view, public policy point of view, from a public capital involvement point of view, and then as a consequence from a private capital point of view. So unlocking this potential is really important for all of us, but also for the planet in trying to reach the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, of course. Our Nairobi summit was organized this year for the first time, and was an important first step to forge not only better opinions, but also meaningful partnerships and connect European and African leaders to unlock this precise potential. So what were the takeaways? First and foremost, the collaboration is key, and we had, of course, incredible partners on site. The Swiss Embassy, of course, the UN SDG Partnership Platform, Nairobi International Financial Center, and last but not least, the Equity Group that has been so gracefully offering us the platforms that we needed to get these exchanges, and also making it possible for us to have a very successful set of discussions. Africa offers massive opportunities in areas like renewable, of course, energy, agriculture, and tech, not just for the local development, but for global progress. The summit showcased East Africa's vibrant sustainability ecosystems and the ambition of African innovators. However, barriers remain. Affordable capital, data transparency, alignment across sectors, and of course political stability are all elements that do contribute to both slowing down the process if not managed properly, or accelerating the process if managed properly. Solutions must then focus on reducing investment risks and ensuring measurable impact. And we've heard already yesterday that we are on our way in both of those aspects to have the better tools today than we had, and better data that we had already since only a few years ago. So looking ahead, this is just the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, and the trust is being built, and has in particular with Kenya been built, and partnership are in place. Now it's about really taking action, connecting, if we can, more dots, and the dots are here in this room, driving investment and scaling impact together. So let's build this momentum. Let's get to exchange our experiences, expertise, and hopefully resources to deepen collaboration and create real exchanges, because sustainable development requires, as we all know, a collective effort. Thank you for your attention, and have a great session.
Thank you very much, Patrick Odier. Delighted to have you. I'm especially privileged and delighted to invite an icon who we joke and call the Patrick Odier of Africa, Dr. James Mwangi, who is the head of the Equity Bank Group, a good friend and somebody who has been an extremely close partner to the whole Africa financial ecosystem. Dr. James Mwangi, please put your hands together for him.
Thank you very much, Ali, for your kind words. Patrick, thank you very much for having us in Geneva and sustaining the momentum of this convening. I'm pretty privileged. I want just to say a couple of words, particularly about our collaboration with the UN Nairobi office and the leadership of Dr. Jackson. And broadly, we were, as Equity Group, fully convinced of the role that the Sustainable Development Goals would play in transforming Africa. But we are now more excited when we saw the UN think we need to build a bridge for the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm talking about the theme of this conversation. And if you look and if a flash back, you see our Sustainable Development Goals have all along been funded. But the fact that the UN have entertained that we can create a bridge between funding and finance got us very, very excited. And particularly if the bridge leads us to breaded finance, where the two works together, such that we could be able to get the returns that financing looks for, and look and also meet the impact that funding, particularly with the UN agencies, have focused on. The strength of this is that financing brings scale, so we could really move to the next level in terms of scale, and we can sustain. We know very well the power of financing in sustaining whatever it involved in. The way it is structured to sustain because it's return-oriented. When it comes to funding, it will help us to unlock some of the challenges, the barriers that has held finance back, particularly on the African continent. Then we'll be able to unlock those challenges, whether it's capacitation, whether it's de-risking, whether it's proof of concept. Funding would be able to resolve all that, and then financing takes that to scale and sustain. But let's look at the movement of Africa. Africa would never have had a better moment when the two comes together, when we build a bridge between funding and financing. Africa, for a long time, the two have worked independent of each other. And so what we have witnessed in Africa is programs. And when the program funding ends, that program comes to an end. And that really has been the biggest undoing of all the initiatives and efforts that has witnessed in Africa. Capacitation and de-risking and proof of concept is a continuous process. So when you add programs, then you add you bring it back to zero. Financing has been avoiding Africa because of the concept of risk. I truly believe it's not about risk, it's lack of understanding the risk. Africa has been too far from opportunities, and there have been better alternatives to the opportunities that Africa has been offering. And as a result, financing has been shy. And that is why funding has been left alone to deal with the challenge of Africa. But the moment for Africa has come. I don't want to sound like I'm preaching the rise of Africa, but we have seen this and witnessed this. There was a movement for Europe during the agrarian revolution. There is the industrial revolution that saw America take off. We saw the green revolution take Asia and the rise of the tigers. I believe the movement for Africa is here with us. And it's here with us on the basis of facts. The current global economic structure was designed in 1947. And we all see the friction that model is having with the realities of today, and the clamor for amendments and adjustment to that model, whether it's the governance structures of the UN, whether it's the financing model of the Bretton Woods institutions, whether it's the trade model of the World Trade Organization. The world is not at peace with the structure that has brought us together. That movement of 1947 is back with us. We have to redesign afresh the model that will take the world forward. That model, fortunately, is coming or is being reconstructed when Africa is on the table. In 1947, Africa was on the menu. Today, Africa is on the table, voicing its concerns and its contribution. Three aspects gives Africa a position on the table. The first one is demographics. We have, and I'll use the term that some people are very uncomfortable with, the global north and the global south. The global north has an aging population, and the global south has a rising population. There is nowhere population is growing faster than in Africa. If you don't have this data with you, Africa and China has the same size in terms of population. By 2050, Africa will be almost double the size of China in terms of population. It will be home to 2.6 billion people. IMF data, if you want the reference. 33% of the world labor force will be in Africa. If labor will be in Africa, then disposable income earned by the labor will be in Africa. If it will be 33%, the purchasing power will be closer, or the spending power. Let's use the disposable spending power of consumption will be in Africa. 25% of the world market will be in Africa. One then bets, where would you best locate your investment other than in the marketplace? In the consuming marketplace, not just a marketplace, but the marketplace with the disposable income. One of the biggest challenges that we have today is the issue of food security. And we all know the impact it's having on inflation, global inflation. That problem can easily be resolved if we finance agriculture in Africa. Africa has 65% of unutilized arable land. It's a resource that you can't migrate to any other place. You can only develop it when it's in Africa. It requires financing, and we solve a global problem that affects all of us through inflation, particularly food inflation. The third one that really we could debate about is energy transition. We all want to save the planet. We all want to reduce emissions globally, and that is tied to the sources of energy. 62% of undeveloped renewable energy in the world is in Africa. The only way to solve the energy transition, the emission challenge, is developing that renewable energy in Africa. And naturally, investments are drawn by energy sources. The biggest challenge of investment is accessible, renewable, affordable energy. It's not energy that moves, it's investment that moves to where energy is generated. Africa requires financing for its energy development, and of course the consequent investment that energy would draw to the continent. And we really need to solve the renewable technologies solution. Africa brings on the table 40% of the renewable resources that power renewable technologies. The issue is how we deal with it. One caution, this will not happen unless we rethink the global supply chains. The current global supply chains have been designed to extract from resource-rich countries to energy rich countries. So the only way to deal with this is to develop energy in Africa, finance energy in Africa. This doesn't require funding. This requires financing because they are all commercial projects. Agriculture is commercial, energy infrastructure is commercial, investment to utilize energy is commercial, and so the need to move from funding to financing, where we have a return so that we can go to scale and we can sustain. Lastly, Africa has no legacy projects. By developing energy, you are not writing off previously existing energy infrastructure. 93% of Kenya's energy is from renewable energy. So there are no write-offs. The opportunity cost of writing off previous investment doesn't exist. And that makes the case for financing Africa, not just a persuasive one, but a logical one, because it gives return and is the lowest opportunity cost option that we have. We solve 3 of the world's biggest problems. We solve youth unemployment. By solving youth unemployment by developing or financing Africa development, then we stem the migration of Africans from Africa to Europe. If we fail to do it, by 2050, we'll have 1 billion Africans in Europe. The choice is ours. To create opportunities for Africans in Africa, or to make room for them in Europe, and we coexist. But what will be the implication and impact? Alif, I've seen you have stood. Let me close by saying, a transformed Africa, a financed Africa, is a sustainable world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. James Wangi. Really good, insightful comments, and I mean, the applause says it all, so thank you so much. I now have a bit of a commercial announcement. We have a deep dive on Africa. There's often this question about where are those bankable deals, scalable deals in Africa that one can invest in. So I think this is our second Building Bridges Summit, and we've had one in Africa. So what we're doing is tomorrow, we have 9 African investment opportunities being curated and presented to you in a 2-hour deep dive session. And we'd love to invite you to be there. It's tomorrow from 2 to 4 p.m. in room 14, level 2. I announced that because it's not on the main program, but if you need the information, please approach any of us. Our co-partners in this event, SDC, Alpha Mundi, and World Economic Forum, have also been amazing partners, and we thank them for their partnership. I now have great pleasure in inviting the Ambassador, Assistant Director General, Head of Global Cooperation Department, Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, SDC's, our good friend Christian Frutiger, to please take it from here. Thank you.
I'll announce it. Okay. Hello, everybody. Good to have such a full room. That's absolutely amazing. We will go into a panel discussion. I will ask the panelists to come up to the scene, and while you do that, we will show a short video. So the panelists are Dr. James Wangi, if you could come back and join us, Sandrine Henton from EG Capital, Andre Kern from the World Economic Forum, Tim Raji, Alpha Mundi, Julia Greenland from HBGI, and Charles Munwoki from Craft Skills. So please come up. and take your seat. As they do that, can we show the video?
Kenya and Geneva, two cities thousands of miles apart, yet united by a bold vision, building bridges to unlock Africa's boundless opportunities.
The idea now is to bring those conversations together, those two conversations together, so that we can have a bridge between financial capital in Western Europe, through Geneva, and into Africa through Nairobi.
Building Bridges was created 5 years ago really with the objectives of trying to improve or accelerate the role of finance or of capital into the sustainability transition.
Building Bridges is all about integrating all stakeholders and trying to have a conversation where we move together, because I guess it's the new word, but it's about this more systemic approach on how we try and solve the big challenges that the whole world faces.
But if the skills and competences built in agro-processing are extended to manufacturing and value addition in minerals, and specifically the green strategic minerals that goes into powering renewable energy, then the continent can transform within a generation.
I think Africa, it's projected that in 2050 we shall be having 25% of the global population. So that can be seen in different lenses. One, potential market. Where is the capital going to come to finance that development?
Africa is the next frontier for opportunities and investments.
Kenya was chosen because it's an ideal place to come to invest here. You have a thriving private sector, you have a very stable economic and political environment.
And of course, the bridge goes in both directions, right? So we're looking at the opportunity for Swiss capital to flow into Africa, but we're also looking at the opportunity for African investment into Europe. There's this beautiful symmetry between the two cities. It makes all the sense in the world.
Africa is the next frontier, a land of innovation, resilience, and boundless opportunities. The bridge is being built. The question is, will you be part of this transformative journey?
You can maybe a bit of an applause. Also, you are already part of the journey, and the journey will continue. We have now a panel conversation for roughly 20 minutes. So we have a big panel, so I'll ask each of you to be very brief, because we also want to go to the audience. If you could show the QR code, there is a Slido, so scan the QR code and ask your question, and then you can vote for each other's questions, and that should allow the panelists then to answer the main questions, those that have been voted most. And again, as Arif said, tomorrow there will be another opportunity, and towards the end we'll also reflect on what comes next. Where do we take all this? May I come back to you, James? I will address all of you with your first names and without the titles, because we don't have much time. James, the time for Africa, the moment for Africa is now, you said. And yet there are obstacles. What the SDG partnership platform also shows is that African entrepreneurs really have difficulties to attract investments. What would they need to do differently?
Thank you very much. I think the opportunity in Africa is very significant, is massive. It requires economies of scale. So the capital outlays are significant. What I think the African entrepreneurs who are trying to raise capital needs to do is to seek partnerships and collaboration so that we have the right amount of capital equal to the opportunity on the African continent. If I gave you the example of Equity Bank, 28 years ago, we realized we didn't have the capacity to raise funds, and we opened ourselves. Today, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is the largest shareholder in Equity Group. The World Bank, IFC, is the second largest shareholder. BlackRock and the others along the way. But it's because we embraced the concept that here is a big opportunity of financing in Africa. We don't have capital. The opportunity is big. Let's share the opportunity. So Africa requires a shared prosperity model for entrepreneurs.
Thank you, James. Seek partnership. Sandrine, EG Capital, you invest in high growth companies in East African markets, and you do that very often through a gender lens investment approach. Now, it's sort of stating the obvious. It's investing in women tends to be actually more profitable than investing in men. So can you tell us more about this?
Sure. So we invest private debt across Eastern and Southern Africa in essential sectors, food, health, and education. These are critical sectors for climate adaptation in Africa. And it's all about women and young people, and James said it, it's the demographic. Women and young people at the heart of the consumer economy. These essential sectors are hugely counter-cyclical and offer huge opportunity for both return and impact, and it's women farmers, teachers, nurses. In Africa, it's also women who pay the groceries, the school fees, and the healthcare bills. And we've seen these sectors actually do really well during the pandemic. So building bridges is also being made when it comes to financing medium-sized businesses, access to debt financing. I think only 0.3% of the world credit market is available in Africa. We are maybe 5 mezzanine debt managers in the mid-cap space on the continent. It is a great strategy for mitigating some of the exit risks that we see. And it's also one for building very human bridges beyond the financing of capital. It's building bridges with African investors. We are targeting 60% private capital mobilization. With African institutional capital and family offices from Europe, US, Middle East, Africa that are looking at strategic assets in Africa. And again, it comes back to women and young people. It is the heart of the consumer economy. And some of these family businesses in Africa, elsewhere, that understand those sectors and want to acquire strategic assets and do business in Africa, we bring them together and we make investments happen.
Thanks a lot. Now, this remains still at quite a small scale. Where do you see the potential for growth and bigger scale?
Yeah, I would say there's still a concentration of capital in energy, infrastructure, financial services. So yes, food, health, education are often, sadly, at the bottom of the capital stack. So there's a huge opportunity to drive private sector capital in those essential climate adaptation sectors. They are the sectors that are driving the resilience of the local economy against external shocks. So they're extremely strategic for many aspects, and there's still a huge opportunity to bring that capital to scale, as you say, absolutely right.
Thank you. Andre, let's come to you. World Economic Forum, Humanitarian Resilience Investment Initiative. So looking at investments in Africa through a humanitarian lens, I mean, you've gone, you've picked the hardest of the challenges. So going into investment directly out of a crisis. How is it working? How is it going?
It isn't, and I think it's an important distinction to make also when we speak of frontier market. We take a wide range of contexts, but we are really looking at how to address the most vulnerable communities. I think the conversation for us really changed when we put the entrepreneurs, the impact businesses in the center. And I think we are driven by their level of ambition, but also the possibility of where progress is made, even in some of the harshest areas. I think what we've seen over the years is that there's a very active ecosystem. but it's extremely fragmented. We've seen really interesting companies. Sun Culture was highlighted there. You have companies like Renewia operating in the northern parts of Kenya. So what we've seen is, you know, there's a lot of conversation about financial innovation, but we often, and you mentioned this, so to echo the partnership side, the kind of trust building that's required to be built along all of these different stakeholders. So from humanitarian development to donors to DFIs to foundations. Maybe I'll highlight just 3 quick opportunities where we've seen positive movement. One is the partnerships, the collaboration with humanitarian and development players. We see this with IFC partnering with UNHCR, EBRD partnering with the International Rescue Committee. So really bridging and benefiting from the detailed knowledge and the community access on the ground, but also to help build into the risk and the market assessments. I think the second is how do you benefit from the access to, if I can call it, the humanitarian market, right? So the procurement and services of goods from a sustainable perspective, as I mentioned, the companies like Renewia providing solar grid solutions in northern Kenya. You know, if they have a procurement to help support and operate one of the hospitals in Kakuma refugee camp, there is an opportunity to bring in a more additional revenue stream, but also some longer-term stability by expanding that service or collaboration across a wider range in northern Kenya. And then the final one on investors, you know, we engage a lot of different types of investors, DFIs and foundations, that as I mentioned, and sometimes there's this discussion, there isn't a pipeline, we believe there is one. If I just take the northern Kenya, there's an initial work done by Cross Boundary that was supported with USAID. Those operating there, plus those that are willing to enter, amounts to about $450 million US. But there's this focus on what currently exists to be investable now. And I think what we've looked at is how do you build that continuum of collaboration of who can come in with different stacks of capital at different stages, both from concessionary all the way to you know, there's a degree of market level return. And one of the ways that we've tried to tackle this is with players like the African Development Bank that have been seeking to integrate sort of the humanitarian perspectives across their operations. So that's why we've partnered with them alongside the US and IFC in places like northern Kenya, but they were looking to expand in other markets. So all again driven by the focus on the opportunities that exist and the stress testing of collaboration through those. But also looking at that kind of wider ecosystem that we believe needs to come together.
Am I correct in saying that we're more on the public side than on the private side?
In terms of movement?
In terms of movement and in terms of financing?
I think we're seeing a dual dynamic. I think one is that on the public side, especially if you think of sort of the more traditional aid models, there's a deep conversation that is occurring at different levels about in which areas can you transition to more sustainable investments. I think there is an opening for collaboration with different parts of the private sector that has now moved beyond this is just sort of charity or philanthropic side. So I think there's movement on both.
Thank you. I will go to Tim and then come to Julia. Tim, you used to be a Swiss banker, but then changed completely the approach, 17 years ago. What drove you as an entrepreneur to invest in Africa?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I also want to salute Arif because he really helped us prepare this panel and bring it together. So thank you you're very discreet there on the side, but thank you. So the first time I set foot in Africa, I was 10 years old. My mother was working for the UN, and it was the first conference for women's rights in Africa. And it was convened in Nairobi. And I was sitting in the room as delegates came in, and it was this incredible mosaic of colors and different dressing styles. And my first message to the audience is to remember that Africa is not a monolith. It's just this incredible mosaic of cultures and countries. There's more than 50 countries in Africa, more than 2,000 native languages, and a lot of different socioeconomic realities at play. And when you invest in Africa, you have to be very careful to understand the local dynamics and not just treat it as one block. The reason we invested in Africa is because you can get so much impact for every dollar you invest when you invest in Africa. And we started investing in Latin America, and I'm very proud, you know, my family has Latin roots, so very, very happy with that chapter of Alpha Muni's history. But in Africa, when you invest, you can transform lives even faster and easier. And the other attractive feature of Africa is that if you get it right, and it's not always easy to get it right, you can grow to scale a lot faster, right? And you can not just invest in one country and bring a company to market leadership in one country, you can help it expand across borders. So one of the pictures that we saw in the initial presentation was that of Peter, the founder of Burn Manufacturing. And Burn Manufacturing, when I first met them more than a decade ago, they were heavily subsidized. They were trying to bring clean cooking to African markets, in Kenya in particular. And today, they're a profitable company operating in 12 countries. They have multi-million in net profits. And part of their profits are derived from carbon credits. They issued earlier this year their first bond, and it was the first bond to finance clean cooking in Africa. And we were very happy to participate in that. So I think you can see that in a matter of less than a decade, you can go from a very early stage subsidized company to a company operating across multiple markets, highly profitable, and with a lot of room for growth. And of course, in this particular case, preventing all the deaths related to indoor pollution, right? And we also invested in another solar company in Uganda called Phoenix International in 2012. We went through different stages of growth with this company through debt and equity. And by 2018, they had delivered first-time access to more than 1 million families in Uganda for renewable energy access. And they were acquired by a multinational NG. And since the acquisition, they've been expanding to close to a dozen markets as well in Africa. So you can have successful, profitable impact narratives in Africa. We've also had our share of failures. There is another solar company that didn't do well after it tried to expand to Nigeria and underestimated how long it would take to gain a market foothold in Nigeria. So I think, you know, as fund managers and as partners of the development finance narrative, it is important to be honest and transparent about what you achieve and where you fail and why you fail, because that's really what helps the market move forward. Finally, just one observation, big picture, and James already mentioned the demographics at play and the share of the labor force that Africa is going to represent over the next couple of decades. Africa is a growth story of our generation, right? It is growing in global market capitalization share. It is growing in global GDP share. It is growing in population and labor force. If you're not invested in Africa, at some point somebody's going to say, what are you doing with your fiduciary duty? Why are you missing out on the best story? And you know, a lot of people point to risk, and I think that the media are not very helpful, because mostly what you see on international media is these constant stories about coups and conflict and droughts and floods, and it's this biblical narrative of disaster across Africa. But in fact, if you've got boots on the ground, and if you see the transformation in cities like Nairobi, you cannot help but be impressed, right? It's just fantastic, the growth that you see in infrastructure and in entrepreneurial opportunities. So I'll conclude with that and just say, if you haven't been to Africa, please go. It will change your perception of risk. In fact, we have demonstration and statistics demonstrating that the Africans are paying a premium on risk that is not warranted in every case. And we have the evidence on infrastructure. You know, yesterday they mentioned 20 basis points of defaults, but they're still paying more than 4% above the global average. So there's an effort to be made to change the risk perception, to see the reality for what it is, and to be part of the greatest growth story of our generation. Thank you.
Wow, we'll come back to that question of risk. I think it's one of those topping in Slido. Julia, Healthy Brains Global Initiative with a strong focus on Africa, and you're looking at outcome-based incentives. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think that working on outcomes is so exciting, because it allows you to look past some of the day-to-day noise and think about the impact that your investment is actually making. And it allows you to look across the ecosystem and think about how the existing capital can make the most impact on the lives of people. And I loved how Dr. Mwangi talked about it before. It's almost like we're in 1947 and that we had this chance to remake the world. And I love it when we have the opportunity to look across existing sectors and think about how we can make them more impactful by focusing not on how can we just do the things that we're already paid for, but how can we really focus on whether or not people's lives improve. A really good example, I think, is in the education sector. So there's a huge amount of resourcing in Kenya, domestic resources from incredibly generous programs like Equity Group's Wings to Fly program, which focuses on ensuring that young people can stay in school and education. And those programs have had an incredible impact. But if we take a step back and we're able to look at where is the greatest impact, we also have an opportunity to really start focusing some of those resources towards the people who are most excluded and most in need. So, for example, as many of you probably know, in Kenya, like many African countries, there's still a huge burden of teenage pregnancy. And even 30 years after the Kenyan government allowed girls who have had a child to go back to school, only 2% of adolescents who have had a child are in school or education. So we have this incredible opportunity to use an outcomes fund, and we're working with Education Outcomes Fund and the SDG Partnership Platform and some other partners to really think about how can we motivate these existing forms of sustainable, domestic, locally rooted capital to have the greatest impact on the lives of people whose lives are in real danger. You know, a girl who is excluded from school has a huge likelihood of ending up in a child marriage, a huge likelihood of never being able to return to school, and an almost certainty of staying in poverty, and her children not being able to achieve their ambitions either. So I think that by focusing on outcomes, we're able to look at these really complex problems, and by putting the money on the outcomes and on that girl's achievement actually happening and actually being supported, we're able to allow this very, very dynamic sector in Kenya to meet those needs and to take advantage of all of this existing domestic generosity to achieve those impacts.
Thank you very much. Charles, I now have to ask you, impact or profitability or both? And putting this in the context of your business, wind power turbines, including the second largest wind farm in Kenya.
Yeah, and that's a very, very interesting question. Because the balance always, when you sit in the boardroom to discuss on how you want to impact your community, it always has a measure in how you want to apportion your profits and what you want to do towards the communities. But what we've done in Kipeto, we have adopted a very interesting model where we created a community trust. From the distributable, 5% of distributable profits have gone towards community impact projects. And as the UN award for the year 2024 in Kenya, part of that award came because of the activities that we've done to affect or to create positive impact to the community. We have drilled boreholes for the community to get or to access water. We have done road networks. We have created opportunities for bursaries to children from disadvantaged families. We have created what I will say sustainable projects in the community, especially by the fact that the area where we are, there are a lot of wild animals that come during the night to come and attack the families. So we help the families also have sustainable livelihood by creating what we call in Swahili, boma. Boma means an area where you create for your animals. So we have done a very good systems where you cage off the animals. So when the tigers cross over during the night, they cannot attack the livelihood of the families through catching or taking away the goats and the sheep. And that's part of the things we've done in the community. But also the balance between profitability and impact has also caused us to think around how do we expand your project. We are the second largest project in terms of energy production on wind in the country. And are we seeking the government to allow us to do an expansion program? What that will do is it will increase our net income that comes, and also we recoup back from what we've been losing in terms of giving back to the community, and also increase our share of the 5% that is going back to the community. So the balance has been an interesting one, and we are extremely excited for what we've done in that area, and we look forward to having investors who can come and just work with us to ensure that that impact keeps on growing and growing in other areas.
So what were the two biggest challenges in attracting investors so far?
The two biggest one is, the first one is what James referred to and what our team also mentioned, is the perceived risk. According to IFC report 2023 on risks in Africa, the global emerging markets, between 1993 and 2023, October, the rate of default was 3.6%. And I do know everyone in this room knows these statistics very well. So the biggest challenge we faced, and we've continued to face, is to attract investment and to attract financing. Because there's that tendency to think that we are extremely, or the country is extremely risky in terms of investment. But far from that, the profitability that comes from these nations, and we have been paying our loan, which we received from DFC back in 2020 and 2021, but we've never defaulted even a cent over those 3 years. We do continue to invest or do other projects, but there is no default rate for us. And when we look at the other risk that comes alongside with that is the element of bankability of the projects. We want to invest in this kind of projects, but the element of bankability becomes a big question. And the reason why that is a risk is because most people don't want to de-risk these projects, and you cannot de-risk this project by maybe giving a grant as the project is starting off, or giving some development aid, or giving some angel investment to this project. And then when that round of what you may call ESIA, that round of land, banking your land bankable, getting documents and permits from the government, when that is crossed, then the project becomes bankable and you can proceed to development stage. So it's just a perceived risk, which is actually not a real risk in my view.
Thank you very much. Let's go to your questions. There have been quite a number of them. If you can put the Slido on the screen. I take the second highest ranking question is how to shift the narrative of risk in Africa, and Charles already started it. But would anybody like to add something? Maybe James.
I think the best way of shifting the narrative is by sharing success cases. For instance, for the last 30 years, equity has sustained a 10-fold growth every 5 years without missing out. After the last time equity raised capital was 2007, and it has sustained a growth rate of 30% over that since then with internally funded cash. So essentially, these cases need to be told, and they are made across the African continent. Lastly, our governments need to do much better. I think they allow the negative narratives to take space without any initiative of governments communicating about specific country risk. There is no African risks. The risks are per country. But you can see, even the best countries, nobody knows them. They are branded as African risk.
Thank you very much. The next question is, what innovative financing mechanisms can be utilized to bridge the SDG financing gap in Africa? Julia.
Sure, I'm happy to come in on this one. So a few years ago, we launched the first ever development impact bond for adolescent reproductive health in Kenya. It's been through 2 iterations now. It's implemented by TICO, who are actually here, and it's been it's really shown the incredible potential of a mechanism like that to first of all drive flexible resources into an incredibly critical problem, but also to really drive a lot of cost effectiveness, and to allocate the risk in a way that makes sense. So we have an external investor and outcomes payers who pay as the outcomes are achieved. So development impact bonds are certainly one very exciting and I think quite well-known innovation. And then there's other innovations like outcomes funds, like I was describing now, that can not only play that role of ensuring that the resources are tied most closely to whether or not people actually receive the benefits of what you're trying to do, but also really work to catalyze some of the existing resources within African countries to focus on these really, really high potential and high impact areas.
Thank you. Another question, I just saw one thing to trick Slido is actually put in your question twice, then it pops up automatically. I didn't know that, but it's a very good question. Non-grant financing, for example, equity, the exit strategies. In a very dry market. Who would like to address that? Sandrine?
Perhaps I can take this one, and I would add also on the de-risking. the SDG Impact Finance Initiative, SIFI, together with the Swiss government and UBS Foundation, also have a first loss capital protection. So we find that extremely interesting to have capital guarantees for our investors that are private sector investors, that are African pension funds and family offices. And when it comes to the instrument, the legacy in Africa is 80% of the capital, according to the latest AFCA, the African Association of Private Equity and Venture Capital. 80% of the capital is coming from a European government. So 80% of the returns are going out of Africa, and most of these fund managers are equity generalist fund managers, so therefore huge exit risk. Exit risk is not just in Africa, it's in the US, it's in Europe. Most PE funds are 16 years, not 10 years old. So it's generally across the asset class. We've seen challenges with exits. We're learning the lessons, I would say, from that legacy, are bringing a mezzanine debt product. So again, 0.3% of the world credit reaches Africa, we need more. So with a debt product, you can have your credit, your liquidity, your downside protection. It's a loan effectively over 5 or 7 years that self-liquidates, and so there's much more ability to manage some of these exit risk and to have liquidity and returns. As well as, I would say, that combined with the capital guarantee at the top level of the structure really helps investors that would otherwise not come to Africa because of many reasons. It also helps local capital, the mobilization of local institutional capital, be protected when going into some of these private alternative asset classes that are not your usual treasury bonds or real estate investments. So there are ways to mitigate for these risks.
Thank you. We take one more question. Oh, that is a long one. As an off-grid renewable energy access entrepreneur in Kenya, we face various financing challenges. One is in working capital finance in local currency. What can be done by commercial banks in Kenya to accelerate this type of finance within the context of sustainable renewable energy finance? I guess this is for the banker.
Very good. It is true that there are challenges with local currency, volatility, and of course, significant. But the way to deal with this is to leverage on local financial systems, such that the component of funding that is required through local currency, you get funding from local currency, such that it's not debt that needs to be paid globally. And that is how we have seen, we have assisted a lot of people in DRC, assisted a lot of people in Kenya, and that solves that problem of volatility in exchange rates.
Thank you very much, and also for organizations like ours in development cooperation or DFI is increasingly also thinking about rather currency hedging than first loss. So that's maybe a good strategy. Thank you very much. It said here big before a timeout. So we have come to the end of this session. I was going to ask each of the panelists to formulate one wish. Instead, what I'll do is I'll ask every single one of you to formulate one wish for yourself. So think 2 seconds about what your wish is for SDG investment in Africa. And then the second thought is, what are you going to do about making this wish come true? So for all of us and for you here in the room, a big hand to the panel. And And with that, I hand back over to Arif for the conclusion and maybe where we could take all this.
Thank you very much to the panel. Really insightful and interesting discussion. I think we needed. I think we could go on for a few more hours. It's such a deep subject here. So I'd just like to maybe try and touch on some of the things we heard without doing sort of a comprehensive summary. But just to say that Patrick Odier kicked us off by saying that Africa presents the promise and potential of the future, and that Building Bridges is keen to build this bridge between Europe and Africa, starting with the legs of the bridge, which could be Geneva and Nairobi, as traditional financial centers, and also UN global head offices in the two continents. James Mangi spoke about the Africa being held back by project grant funding, and that all the innovations and all the adaptation to the local context that happens in the cost of it ends when the grant funding ends. So really we need to move this narrative from funding to financing, and that's why I was very pleased with our partnership with the SDG Partnership Platform and other partners who are here. Demographic trends show that the population in Africa will be 2.6 million people by 2060, and 33% will be in Africa. This is the consumer market of the future. Our average age is 19. This continent represents tremendous future consumer opportunities. So where would you locate your future business if you're thinking 100 years ahead? The other question was the question of food security. And in Africa, we have 64% of arable land, which needs financing. Unlike our commodities, which have been exported raw for 60 years since independence, which isn't very smart, land remains in Africa, so we need to bring the finance to Africa rather than export stuff. And therefore, the energy transition is a good example, where we have 62% of sources of energy, green energy in Africa, including the critical minerals for the green transition. So here are opportunities for value chains that partners can invest into Africa. I think his tagline was, energy doesn't move, but investment moves. So, a bit of caution that we need to de-link the global supply chains, extracting from resource-rich countries to energy-rich countries, and we need to finance energy back into Africa. And Kenya, I think, is a good example with over 93%, I think you said, or even more of renewable energy today as we speak. James Mangi also spoke about partnerships. One way to mitigate this narrative for Africa is really to unlock partnerships and highlight success examples. We're always hearing this mainstream narrative, as Tim says, in the media, and we really need to be visiting Africa, understanding what's happening, and then speak from a position of real knowledge. And that's why the Building Bridges team came out to Africa a couple of times, and that has helped a lot of understanding. Partnership with humanitarian partners that Tim talked about, and some of the opportunities around humanitarian procurement and supply chains is something that presents an investment opportunity. Sandrine spoke about the gender lens, which actually creates greater investment profitability as well, and that's where the greatest needs are. In sectors like food, health, and education, women and young people at the heart of the consumer market are oftentimes underserved by financing, which tends to go to infrastructure and services usually. So we need to really get around the 0.3% of private debt availability into Africa. And here's a huge opportunity that we need to turn around. We talked about entrepreneurs and communities being at the heart of our work, so it's also important to create that resilience on the ground. I think given the climate shocks, and we all know Africa pollutes 3% of the globe, but feels 60% of the impacts. I won't repeat everything that everyone else has said. In the interest of time, I'd like you to end on time so that you can move on to your next sessions. But just to remind you, tomorrow, Wednesday, 2 to 4 p.m., we have our deep dive opportunity, 2 hours of pitches by 9 African investment opportunities of diverse types. We have funds, we have outcome funds, we have different sectors, diverse sectors, we have energy. So please try and make it, and the room, once again, is room 14, yes. So thank you so much. I'd like to really propose a vote of thanks to all our partners, SDC, Alpha Mundi, World Economic Forum, for co-organizing this session. I'd like to sincerely thank all our high-powered panelists. I could listen to them for the whole day. And special thanks to our very able moderator, Ambassador Christian Frutiger, for very able moderation in a very short period of time. It's not easy to manage a large panel in 1 hour with all of the bells and whistles. And most of all, thank you all for coming to this session. Thank you for making it, and thank you for this standing room only a confirmation that this is an important subject into the future. Thank you and have a good day.